Hey guys, tonight we step into a shadowy chamber lit by flickering oil lamps. The air thick with cinnamon and old parchment. You're perched on a low stool beside a rickety wooden table strewn with scrolls so brittle you can almost hear them whisper secrets of ancient healers. You probably won't survive this if you're faint of heart, or if the scent of musty papyrus gives you a headache. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments so we can all compare bedside clocks. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through dusty scrolls until you land on the Ebers Papyrus, the world's oldest surviving medical text from around 1550 BCE. This Egyptian masterpiece catalogs over 700 remedies. It's from honey poultices for wounds to willow bark concoctions for pain. Relief, a mainstream historical fact most chemistry classes breeze past. Your fingers brush against a faded illustration of a physician stirring a clay bowl, and you swear you hear distant temple choirs chanting. Meanwhile, a marginal note mentions crocodile dung as an eye ointment, a quirky tidbit that would give your modern-day optometrist nightmares and probably a hazard pay bump. As you lean closer, you notice the text abruptly shifts tone. The high priests, wielding religious power, quietly dictated which treatments saw daylight and which were buried in temple vaults. Politics and spirituality intertwined so tightly that some cures never left the sanctum. Historians still argue whether these decisions were about maintaining divine authority or preventing folk healers from outshining temple doctors. Either way, entire libraries of empirical wisdom vanished in ritual burnings or secret silos. Tucked beneath sandstone pillars, you can almost feel the rough papyrus under your fingertips as you imagine a patient awaiting a poultice made from pressed figs mixed with sulfur. An accompanying note suggests a hallucinogenic mushroom brew used in purification rites. Another fringe remedy that straddles the line between medicine and metaphysical experiment. It's like stumbling on an ancient prototype for microdosing. Centuries before Silicon Valley, influencers turned it into weekend brunch chatter. Tactile memories swirls around you. The scuff of your sandals on flagstone. The faint echo of a scribe flipping to a different scroll. The metallic temps of incense smoke curling through the chamber. Every sense floods in as if you've been time traveling on a rickety carriage, careening past history's overlooked remedies. You pause, half expecting a curator in a wool robe to shush youth. The only shush here is the soft rustle of papyrus. Your thoughts drift to modern pharmacy aisles, where every pill bottle sports a glossy label and zero crocodile dung. It's a stark contrast, okay? And you can't help but chuckle at how your smartphone pharmacy app would handle these prescriptions. Swipe right for anthrax cure. Sorry, out of stock. It's almost as absurd as explaining vanishing the temple libraries to your skeptical roommate. Between the kitchen-grade garlic poultices and the snake oil scams of your Dove, you realize that many of these long-lost treatments might have had genuine effects, yet, without continuity, they were doomed to oblivion. Scholars debate the line between herbal efficacy and ritual placebo, so much so that every new fragment sparks fresh controversy. Your eyes grow heavy, lulled by the rhythmic descriptions of ancient compound preparations. And you sense the tentacles of sleep wrapping around your thoughts, ready to pull you deeper into history's hidden apothecary. You wander down a colonnaded corridor scented with olive oil and crushed thyme. Your sandals tapping against worn marble as you approach a small lecture hall in Rome. Faded frescoes of Hercules and Hippocrates flank the room. And you recall the brittle papyrus you handled earlier crocodile dung sunscreen. Anyone? Here, Galen of Pergamon once lectured, dissecting live monkeys to map organs with an empirical rigor that dazzled the Roman elite. His four-humor theory: blood, phlegm, black bile. Yellow bile became the backbone of Western medicine for over a millennium. A mainstream historical fact that even your high school biology teacher grudgingly respected. You settle onto a smooth stone bench and imagine Galen's voice echoing. Balance the humors, treat the cause, heal the body. He championed complex potions. One recipe combined powdered silk, myrrh, and crushed emerald dust to staunch bleeding an eyebrow-raising blend that hints at alchemy's fringe flirtations. You almost chuckle at the thought of modern ER doctors swapping emerald for Epsom salt. Either way, that potion probably cost a small fortune as the years tick forward. You sense the growing murmur of a new power rising from the city's darkened basilicas. Christian bishops proclaimed divine healing through prayer, casting human dissection and empirical cures as acts of hubris. Some clerics labeled anatomy studies sacrilegious, insisting the body was a temple not to be violated. Historians still argue whether this condemnation sprang from genuine piety or a strategic bid to monopolize spiritual authority. Either way, Galen's vivisections and herbal compendia began slipping into obscurity, locked in monastery libraries. Under key and candlelight, you lean back against the cold stone, tasting lingering pepper from a merchant's cloak, as you imagine a monk brushing cobwebs from a leather-bound copy of The Usefulness of the Parts. The ink is smudged where a curious scribe once doodled a caricature of a goat-headed demon, banishing a syringe-wielding doctora. Quirky aside that hints at medieval mindsets where medicine and magic coexisted like roommates tolerating each other's quirks in hushed chambers. Church councils debated the morality of certain treatments. Bloodletting, once Galen's go-to for humoral balance, found defenders and detractors. Some clergy viewed it as offering one's blood in penance. Others decried it as bodily mutilation. You picture candle flames flickering over parchment scrolls, debating whether draining a fever was akin to draining one's soul. Scholars still argue whether ecclesiastical edicts banned some cures outright, or simply nudged practitioners to cloak their remedies in sacramental language. Faint breeze slips through latticework windows, carrying the tang of fresh basil from an herb garden outside. You inhale deeply, letting the scent mingle with mental images of alchemists stirring crucibles of mercury and sulfur. Somewhere, an apothecary's bell clangs as a novice hands over a sealed jar of arsenic-laced wound. Save another fringe concoction that straddled the line between remedy and poison. You blink at the thought that, centuries later, that very jar might be mistaken for a Halloween prop. Your spine tingles as you recall how Galen's texts were translated into Arabic and kept alive in Islamic Golden Age centers like Baghdad. Physicians expanded on his work, adding distillation techniques and new pharmacopoeia entries. Yet, when those manuscripts trickled back into Europe, church scribes sometimes excised sections on anatomy or plant hallucinogens, anything that smacked too strongly of pagan ritual. Thus, some botanical elixirs that cured insomnia or migraines vanished from Latin Christendom's purview. You shift your weight, feeling the chill of stone beneath you, and imagine a scholar decades later discovering marginalia hinting at a lost remedy, a poultice of lily bulb and ground turquoise said to sharpen vision. It sounds like snake oil, but fringe mentions in Arabic herbals give it just enough credibility to make you wonder if medieval cataract surgery had a secret backup plan. The clatter of sandals on the corridor returns your attention to the present. As you rise and trace your finger along a carved relief depicting a physician offering herbs to a supplicant, you murmur a half-joke about submitting a patent for emerald dust bandages. Call me. You feel a twinge of kinship with those ancient doctors, balancing science and superstition under the same roof that rang with hymns as you step back into the hallway. The candlelight dims, and you sense the tightrope medieval healers walked between church doctrine and empirical practice. Some hides of Galen's works survived only because loyal scribes hid them beneath gospel glosses or tucked them into reliquary chests labeled saintly curios. Those hidden texts shaped the Renaissance rebirth centuries later, proving that knowledge can't stay suppressed forever. Your heart rate slows as you exit into the cool evening air of modern Rome. Traffic hums, scooters buzz, and a gelato cart chimes in the distance. You stretch, feeling the weight of history lighten, and you realize that every suppressed cure bears witness to the tension between faith and reason. Without doctrinal bans, who knows how medicine might have leaped forward? Then again, without pilgrimage to church doctrine, who knows if the healing arts would have found moral grounding? You pause to watch a busker play a lyre beneath an arch, the plucked strings echoing like distant surgical incisions. A final breeze carries the scent of fried donuts from a corner stand. Modern carbs, ancient remedy for existential hunger. You crack a sleepy smile and recall the fresco of Hippocrates gazing down, perhaps approving this uneasy truce between piety and praxis. The corridor's echo fades as your eyelids grow heavier, lulled by the steady cadence of suppressed knowledge, brushing against theology's Vallon uneasy duet that set the stage for future medical revolutions. As you drift toward slumber, you can almost hear Galen's ghost whispering. The cure survives in shadow, and you wonder what else lies hidden in history's dusty vaults. You slip through a carved jade doorway into a chamber scented with sandalwood and the faint sweetness of dried roots. The lacquered shelves gleam under lantern light, each scroll sealed with crimson silk. Do you remember that crocodile's dung sunscreen from Egypt, and wonder if this room holds equally bizarre cures? Here in Imperial China, millennia of herbology once thrived under emperors who claimed divine mandate to heal all under heaven. You can almost taste the faint bitterness of ginseng tea as you reach for a bronze mortar piled high with slender roots shaped like tiny humans. Mainstream historical fact tells us that Chinese physicians documented ginseng's tonic properties as early as the Shennan Bencao Jing, around 200 CE, praising its key-boosting effects on stamina and longevity. A low hum of conversation drifts from a distant courtyard where palace attendants debate their master's latest edict. In 1707, the Kangxi Emperor issued strict regulations on wild ginseng harvesting, decreeing that only licensed imperial doctors could dispense a tan imperial move that stifled private practitioners and funneled profits to court apothecaries. Historians still argue whether this was driven by genuine concern for dwindling wild ginseng stocks or a covert scheme to monopolize its restorative magic. You imagine clutching a precious pouch of ginseng on a cold morning, praying it wards off your sniffles, and suddenly you're hanging on every imperial word as if your next breath depends on it. Your fingertips brush a scroll, legend illustrating a Tang Dynasty physician concocting a kidney replenishing potion from deer, antler, velvet, and powdered unicorn horn. An odd fringe tidbit that makes you wonder whether magical beasts once roamed the Forbidden City. You stifle a chuckle, picturing a court astrologer hunting unicorns alongside dragons, all for a drop of immortality serum. Modern wildlife conservationists would have a field day with that potion recipe. Lantern light glints off a jade plant label, reading donkey, whose sweet, warming aroma wafts toward you. You pour steaming water over a handful of sliced root and inhale its cinnamon-like spice. The fragrance reminds you of your grandmother's kitchen on New Year's Eve sweet, nostalgic and oddly reassuring in this hushed hall. A whisper of silk brushes past as a palace maid carries in a porcelain teapot, her shoes gliding across stone without the slightest echo. Another sensory layer in this immersive time capsule. You trace the characters on the scroll, reading how imperial scholars once debated whether to attribute certain cures to the divine or to natural law. Some insisted qi was a spiritual essence, while others argued it was simply a form of vital breath, a debate that echoes today in studies on placebo versus phytochemical action. Scholars still argue whether ancient Chinese physicians saw herbal synergy as mystical or protopharmacological. The unanswered question hangs in the air like a perfumed incense trail. A sudden draft stirs the silk tassels of your lantern, okay? And you shiver as you recall the chilly rooms where secret herbal societies met under moonlight. One fragment mentions a moon drink made from fermented chrysanthemum petals and bear bile, used in clandestine rituals to sharpen vision before night hunts. A fringe concoction that straddles the line between remedy and psychedelic chaser. You laugh softly, imagining a hooded figure gulping bear bile to spy on nocturnal animals, all while regretting not bringing an umbrella for that draft. You turn a corner and nearly bump into a lacquered medicine cabinet. You lift a small drawer, labeled dried dragon's jowl, only to find slivers of root carved with tiny scales. A quirk of folklore claimed these roots could fortify one's heart against lovesickness, an odd remedy for heartbreak. A tea, but you muse that after a breakup. You'd probably try anything from datura tea to diamond dust ointment. The temps of herb smoke drifts in, mingling with the metallic scent of old bronze, and you pause to breathe it in, letting the rich aroma ground you in this world of whispered cures. A distant gong signals mealtime in the palace mess hall, and you catch a whiff of steaming rice and pickled cabbage wafting through a lattice window. The contrast between that humble scent and the exotic herbal aromas around you is stark, reminding you that even imperial medicine had to share space with simple kanji. A scholar's voice calls from beyond a fold of silken curtain, reading aloud a prescription for replenishing blood, angelica root, peony bark, and a pinch of cinnabar. The last ingredient raises your eyebrow. Mercury sulfide isn't exactly in the FDA's good books, but fringe recipes once prized cinnabar as a soul-soothing pigment. You settle onto a woven mat beside a low table strewn with porcelain bowls, tasting a drop of licorice-flavored decoction that warms your throat. The pillowy sweetness reminds you of modern herbal cough drops, and you joke that centuries later, you'd still be popping something to soothe a sore throat. Some remedies never change, right? You sniff thoughtfully, recalling emerald dust bandages from Galen's era. And you whisper to yourself that if turmeric had a LinkedIn profile, it'd list ancient trendsetter as its skill. In a hushed corner, you spot a yellowed notice, pinned to a lacquered post. An imperial edict banning private herbalists from marketing miracle life extension pills. Violators faced exile or forced labor in remote ginseng plantations. Harsh penalties for anyone daring to challenge the court's monopoly over longevity. Historians still argue whether these laws preserved endangered species or simply enriched imperial coffers. You tilt your head, pondering how that power play might shadow modern debates over bioprospecting and indigenous knowledge protection. As lantern flames flicker, you'll allow yourself a final look around this cabinet of whispered wonders. You imagine the hidden correspondence between Song Dynasty physicians exchanging secret manuscripts under coded labels, recipes for insomnia, cures using magnolia bark and bamboo sap, passed in hushed tones whenever the wind rattled paper doors. Those whispered networks kept empirical knowledge alive during dynastic upheavals, ensuring that suppressed cures resurfaced when the next enlightened scholar climbed the throne. Your eyelids flutter as the room's hush lulls you. The gentle tap of sandals on marble, echoing like a lullaby. You lean back against polished wood, enveloped by the mingled scents of ginseng, chrysanthemum, and aged sandalwood. Somewhere in the shadows of these lacquered shelves lie cures forgotten by time, waiting for modern science to rediscover their secrets, soar for another imperial decree to bury them again. With a quiet smile, you close your eyes, letting the chamber's ghostly energy pull you toward dreams of hidden libraries and jade-sealed scrolls. You almost hear a distant whisper. The root still whispers, and you drift off, cradled by history's silenced wisdom. You step into a narrow alley off the cathedral square, your boots clicking against cobblestones as a distant bell tolls for another soul claimed by the plague. The scent of brimstone and vinegar curls in the damp air, mingling with the faint perfume of crushed herbs hanging in window baskets. Ahead, a heavy oak door bears the brass crest of the Apothecaries Guild, a symbol that promises both salvation and secrecy. You push it open, and a rush of warm, herb-scented air greets you, along with the crackle of hearth coals and the metallic ring of glass jars being locked away. Inside, shelves groan beneath rows of earthenware jars labeled with faded Latin electuarium, Laudes, Unguentum, Rosarum, Theriaca, and Dramachi. The Black Death which swept through Europe between 1347 and 1351 killed an estimated one-third of the population, a brutal reminder of why these guilds held sway over life and death. You glide a fingertip along a shelf, spotting a jar marked Pulvis Antiplague that's sealed tighter than a miser's coin purse. It supposedly contained a powder made from burnt goat horns, dried toads' heads, and powdered quicksilver, a fringe tidbit that trades on alchemical rumor more than proven remedy. Ah, stout merchant in a patched velvet doublet gestures for you to draw nearer. Only members may witness the mixing, he whispers, voice low enough to blend with the echoing mortar and pestle clacks. You watch as an apprentice lifts a porcelain mortar to crush white willow bark nature's acetylsalicylic acid, the ancestor of aspirina, mainstream historical fact rediscovered centuries later. Next, he sprinkles in shards of lodestone, claiming its magnetic pull will draw plague microbes from the flesh. You squint at the shiny black fragments and stifle a chuckle. If you could magnet sweep a microbe, modern janitors would have invented nano-vacuum bots long ago. You lean toward a burlap-covered table where a ledger lies open by candlelight. Names are crossed out in iron gall ink, notes scrawled in the margins about clandestine sales and royal dispensations. Apothecary masters once hoarded recipes for plague treatments, refusing to divulge them to surgeons or barber surgeons unless they paid hefty fees. Historians still argue whether this was pure profiteering or an attempt to maintain quality control and limit dangerous self-treatment. Either way, entire towns sometimes found themselves at the mercy of guild politics rather than medical need. Your fingers brush the ledger's brittle pages, and a tingle of guilt warms your spine. You imagine a father begging for a vial of Pulvis Antiplague, only to be turned away unless he handed over to silver groats for a laborer. Then there were the seal-breaking fines. Anyone caught copying a recipe risked losing their workshop. Or worse, a wrist in the stocks. The apothecaries claimed these rules preserved public health, but you wonder if the true motive was profit protection under the guise of artisanal integrity. The apprentice ladles the newly mixed paste into small clay pots, each adorned with the guild's emblem. You lift one to your nose, inhaling hints of sage, wormwood, and something so acrid it curls your nostrils. A chemical lullaby meant to ward off miasma, the foul air believed to carry the plague. When you place the pot back on the table, the apprentice offers you a curious fringe remedy. A pair of dried garlic cloves painted with red lead. It's tied around your neck on a crimson ribbon. He claims it cleanses the breath of death. You wiggle your shoulders, imagining wearing plague bling as a fashion statement on Instagram. Hashtag medieval chic. Anyone? A sudden knock rattles the door, and a cloaked figure slips inside, clutching a leather satchel. He demands the guild's private cure for buboes, a salve made from crushed basil leaves, honey, and bear fat. You wince at the idea, bear fat smuggled. From the Baltic, no less but the master apothecary rushes to fill the order, sliding it beneath the workbench where no one else can see. You watch the exchange, tasting dust on your tongue as the intruder pays in marked coins. Labels like "for the Countess only" are scribbled on the underside of jars, another reminder that treatments were rationed by rank and wealth. As you wander deeper into the workshop, the smell of burnt rosemary drifts from an iron brazier. You circle a table where apprentices practice the distillation of rosewater, steam hissing through a copper alembic. Excellent base for plague snuffs, one mutters. Grinding rose petals with crushed pearls, because nothing says royal remedy like jewelry in your nasal cavities. You imagine a queen sneezing into a bejeweled snot trag and grimace. Fringe. Or not. The occasional imperial endorsement kept the guild's coffers full. A low hum of conversation drifts from a side chamber where city officials debate opening the plague hospitals to non-guild healers. The apothecaries stand firm, insisting that only their rigorously trained members can handle dangerous concoctions. Historians still argue whether these restrictions saved lives by preventing amateur poisonings or simply throttled innovation by excluding potentially effective folk remedies. You lean against a barrel of powdered juniper needles. The resinous scent tickling your nose, and wonder if someone, somewhere, had a better cure locked in a peasant's herb basket. You find yourself drawn to a dusty window overlooking a graveyard, where straw mats mark mass burial pits. Cries echo faintly as shovel meets earth, a reminder of the stakes behind every sealed jar in the guild hall. Fingers slick with rosewater, you dab at your temples, trying to process the weight of lives traded for secrecy. Pergamene parchment lists the same few treatments vinegar compresses. Rosemary smoke baths. And the guild's prized pulvis butt omits countless folk cures. Sorrel root poultices, mouth chants, and nettle decoctions said to shorten fever. Periods. As you step back toward the exit, the master apothecary strides forward, offering you a final vial. It gleams with a yellow-green liquid he calls aurum vita, the gold of life allegedly distilled from wine and sulfur. It's promising. Renewed vigor. You cradle the vial between your palms, feeling its cool glass hum with suppressed promise. You imagine it sitting on your nightstand, a last resort for your sniffles, charged with the ghostly breath of medieval chemists. With a courteous nod, you leave the heavy door behind, the lute-like twang of a street musician drifting through. The gloom. You brush your fingers on your cloak, tasting the lingering temps of juniper and garlic. As you rejoin the moonlit alley, you recall the codified secrecy, the sealed recipes. The toll of coins weighed against the toll of lives. Guilds guarding plague cures turned healing into high finance. Oh, and you can't help but shiver partly from the night chill. Partly from the knowledge that some of history's greatest cures were kept out of reach. You pause beneath a lantern, flickering against medieval stone, tracing its light with your gaze until it blurs. Your eyelids grow heavy, lulled by the echo of locked jars and the soft clack of mortar and pestle from beyond the door. You can almost hear a final whisper. Knowledge guarded is knowledge lost, and you step into the quiet night, cradled by the hush of stories untold. You slip into a low-ceilinged laboratory where the air crackles with the Thames of brimstone and the hiss of heated alembics. Flickering torches cast dancing shadows across curved glass vessels filled with iridescent liquids. You recall that plague? Apothecaries, pulvis, anti-plague in Section 4. Now imagine something twice as mysterious. This is Paracelsus's domain. The early 16th century Swiss alchemist-physician, whose real name was Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim. He strode into Basel's university halls, armed with mercury elixirs meant to cure syphilis and minimize poisons, a mainstream historical fact that sent shivers down medieval spines when he proclaimed, "The dose makes the poison." Your fingers hover over a copper retort, bubbling with a silver-hued mixture of mercury, sulfur, and wild thyme. A pungent steam curls toward your face, carrying hints of rosemary and metallic temps. Beneath the rattle of glass, you glimpse a tattered parchment labeled Elixir Vita. Fringe folklore, says Paracelsus, believed distilling rainwater through a human skull could yield a philosopher's mercury capable of restoring youth. You stifle a grin at the thought of someone lugging a skull into a lab would-be Instagram. Skullfluencers would have loved that backstory. Outside, you hear voices raised in academic fury. Local physicians, sworn to Galenic traditions, plot to discredit him. These traditionalists prized bloodletting and humor balancing, so Paracelsus's bold claim that chemically prepared tinctures offered superior cures brandished their Hippocratic oath like a cudgel. Historians still argue whether his radical methods advanced or set back chemical medicine. Either way, his combative style and disdain for classical texts got him expelled from several universities, and his elixirs sank into obscurity. You brush past a bench strewn with crystal phials sealed by cork stoppers, each stamped with the alchemical symbol for mercurial spirits. Mercury glints like liquid silver in torchlight, and you almost hear it whisper eternal youth as you tilt a vial. The stench of sulfur sneaks in behind it, tickling your nostrils, and you suddenly miss the sweet almond aroma of Chinese ginseng tea from Section 3. Paracelsus would have scoffed at herbal tonics, insisting only mineral-based remedies held real potency. A leather-bound grimoire lies open to a page, illustrating a dragon-headed still, its coils dripping a golden elixir said to cure melancholia. You trace the ornate script with childlike curiosity, spotting a fringe notation that recommends adding powdered unicorn horn for potency. You can't help but chuckle, unicorn horn in 1525. Even your most out-there pharmacy app would flag that as possible contaminant. Mythical creature remains. You lean over a wooden workbench to pick up a brass flask marked Mercuriae Sublimatum, a Kyrie surprisingly warm from the furnace's proximity. You tap it gently and hear a hollow ping, like a tea kettle saying hello. A sense of electric anticipation buzzes through you, as if you're about to swallow a potion that might whisk you to tomorrow's headlines. Mayor revived by mad alchemists, mercury tonic. Beyond the workbench, an apprentice wearing a patched leather apron hunches over charcoal sketches of bodily organs. Paracelsus believed disease stemmed from external seeds and chemical imbalances, not internal humor excesses. He'd inject mercury solutions into abscesses to draw out morbid matter, a primitive precursor to modern chelation therapy. Yet religious authorities decried his injections as playing God with toxic metals. You wrinkle your nose, picturing medieval patients wincing as surgeons plunged contaminated needles into swollen flesh. The apprentice glances at you and whispers. He's brewing a fresh batch of his famed serum of the 7 metals. Your eyes widen at the phrase. The elixir supposedly combined gold, silver, copper, tin, iron, mercury, and lead. You joke internally that lead should have at least filed for overtime pay given its risks. Fringe lore adds that the serum could even enable telepathy for a single night, though you doubt your phone's Bluetooth would work under its influence. Somewhere behind a velvet curtain, you hear the soft scrape of parchment as Paracelsus scribbles, a rebuttal to his critics. His voice carries a quiet fire. Let your theories speak in furnaces and flasks, not dusty tomes. You sense the tension in the room, the battle between alchemy's promise and academia's gatekeepers. City councilors, influenced by traditional physicians, quietly revoked his license to practice in several cities. His elixirs were abandoned or confiscated. Some were repurposed for mining assays rather than medicine. You breathe in deeply, the flickering torchlight warming your cheeks, and you trace the rim of a glass cup half filled with amber liquid. It glows like sunset trapped beneath crystal. Paracelsus once claimed a single dose could heal leprosy. It sounds absurd, but snippets in contemporary court records mention nobles petitioning city leaders for access to his cures. You imagine a desperate countess slipping her husband a clandestine vial under draperies. Hoping against hope, a distant hammering echoes outside blacksmiths crafting horseshoes for plague carts. The symphony of industry underscores how little his alchemical dreams fit everyday life. You feel a pang of sadness that his bold, if dangerous, experiments never scaled mainstream practice. Instead, his contemporaries dismissed him as a quack, and his writings circulated only in obscure manuscripts, passed among secretive chemical fraternities. You lean back against a cold stone wall and close your eyes for a moment, recalling the layered aromas of rosemary, mercury, and oak smoke. There's a rhythmic hiss as a pipette drips solution into a crucible. You can almost hear the whispered promise, a single drop to chase away death. Then you remember the apothecaries. Vaults from Section 4, their sealed plague powders. Here, in Paracelsus's haven. Elixirs brewed for life and death factions equally yet. Many were locked away or destroyed in rival acts of Puritan zeal. Your senses tingle as you imagine prowling these chambers centuries later. Modern instruments, ready to analyze the mercury compounds. You'd find traces of cinnabar, quicksilver, and organic acids ingredients that hinted at true antimicrobial properties, despite the toxic risk. Scholars still argue whether his mercurial treatments saved more lives than they harmed. The question lingers like a sulfurous plume. Was he a pioneer or a perilous maverick? A faint draft carries the echo of a distant midnight chime, and the torches sputter, sending sparks into the gloom. You brush away a bead of sweat from your temple, half expecting a ghostly hand to offer you a notebook filled with his lost reaction diagrams. You imagine posting a TikTok, testing 16th century mercury tonic, don't try this at home, and laugh at the mental image of modern disclaimers trailing behind you. As the light dims, you gather yourself to leave. You place the cold brass flask back on its stand, careful not to tip a drop. The apprentice slips you a scrap of paper scrawled with a single recipe. Distill ale with sulfur and white will. It's the kernel of an elixir lost to rivalry, preserved in a hidden margin. You tuck the note into your coat, feeling the weight of suppressed promise against your chest. You step through the heavy oak door into a crisp night air that smells of hay and distant bonfires. The laboratory's sulfuric heartbeats fade behind you, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the low hum of crickets. You pause under starlight, recalling the gleam of mercury in glass, the acrid steam of alchemical steam, and the fierce genius of a physician scorned by his peers. Rivalries buried cures, but the flicker of those elixirs survived in secret notes and whispered legends. You tuck your hands into your cloak pockets, curl your lips into a sleepy smile, and press onward. The echo of Paracelsian secrets accompanying every footstep. You stroll into a dimly lit druggist's shop, whose tall windows blur the neon glow from gas lamps outside. The scent of camphor mingles with aged wood behind the counter, and you can almost hear the jingling chime of a door sign that swung shut too many times. Bottles of amber glass line the shelves, each sporting elaborate lithographed labels promising instant vigor, female comfort, or mercury-free liver restoration. Back in the mid-19th century, Americans spent nearly 1/3 of their disposable income on patent medicines and regulated elixirs sold without prescriptions, a mainstream historical fact that makes your modern copay seem like a bargain. You reach for a cobalt blue bottle labeled Dr. Hazen's Marvelous Tonic and catch the faint crackle of a wooden floorboard beneath your boot. The label claims it's prepared from pure spring water, Appalachian herbs, and no deceitful morphine, subtly poking at rival concoctions loaded with opiates. It's a sly jab, but you recall countless families ruined by spoonfuls of laudanum and morphine tinctures disguised as cure-alls. Meanwhile, a nearby brand boasts guaranteed free of devil's beetle wax. It's a quirky tidbit revealing the era's willingness to blame imaginary vermin over admitting sugar, alcohol, and laudanum were the actual magic ingredients. A gray-mustached clerk in a starched collar approaches and lowers his voice. He whispers about a safer alternative once introduced by a fringe physician named Dr. Sylvester Beecher, whose bee venom serum used live honeybee stings to reduce inflammation. You almost snort topiary-derived injections. What would modern ER think of that? Yet some rural patients swore by it, claiming fewer headaches than after a whiskey-laced headache cure. Historians still argue whether those stings had any pharmacological merit or served as an elaborate placebo wrapped in buzzing drama. Your fingertips brush dusty patent, leather-bound ledgers behind the counter where orders are logged in spidery penmanship. One entry catches your eye: 1 dozen hydrogland elixir for Judge Ford. The judge's name is scored through a penciled note beneath. Discontinued accompanied by Cole's kidney cure. You can almost hear the corporate whisper campaign. Our tonic costs more, but costs less in sleepless nights. Big patent. Barons deployed aggressive marketing billboards, newspaper ads, free samples handed out at county fairs, squeezing smaller producers out of town. Without trademark laws, they'd buy out rivals or literally copy their label art, forcing honest inventors to either sell or vanish. You swish a glass of water and drop in a pill-stamped crescentine, designed to purge impurities. As you watch it fizz, you picture a lab rat in a 19th century experiment receiving the same Pillex. Your rat wouldn't have voluntarily swallowed it. It's a reminder that many tonics contained harsh cathartics like calomel mercury chloride or podophyllum resin, leading to mercurial tremors or worse. Yet patent companies used fancy Latin names, resina, podophylia amara, to mask the brutality. Rare safety advocates published exposes, but their pamphlets sold poorly next to gleaming lithographs of robust gentlemen and rosy-cheeked ladies. A Boy Scout-style demonstration unfolds next door, where Mr. Caldwell's Cocoa Pep tonic promises ceaseless energy. You catch a whiff of cola nut and coca leaves, and you can't help but marvel that the original coca wine formula inspired John Pemberton's Coca-Cola. It's just a few years later. But while Coke removed most cocaine content by 1904, many patent tonics fiercely resisted reformulation. Proprietors claimed any alteration would break the sacred curative compact with loyal customers. You grin, imagining a board meeting. Gentlemen, our customers love feeling wired. Let's not take that thrill away. Your gaze drifts to a framed notice on the wall. Pure Food and Drug Act, passed 1906. We comply. The clerk follows. Your eyes and shrugs. Most of the big boys just tweaked labels rather than formulas, he confides. So profits barely dipped. Historians still argue whether that landmark act eradicated danger or simply polished the sheen on a corporate carousel of replacements. You sip a complimentary sample of Silverland's thyroid. Elixir tastes faintly of liquor shant. You wonder how many hidden impurities slip through the new regulations. Between the clang of glass vials and the scratch of quill on parchment. You feel the weight of market forces pressing on every remedy. Patent barons filed thousands of trademarks, built lavish showrooms, and funded sensational newspaper stunts like releasing live snakes in a mall to prove their anti-venom tonic worked. You chuckle at the mental image. Instagram influencers would definitely call that unethical brand activation. The clerk leans in, voice dropping conspiratorially. There was talk of a remedy distilled from prairie lupin seeds, condemned by the Patent Medicine Board as ineffective, he says. Yet a scattered few claimed it cured chronic coughs better than anything on these shelves. The official minutes supposedly called the lupin elixir medically unsubstantiated. Word is, the patent barons lobbied customs to block seed imports and starve the rival supply chain. You shiver. It's picturing a single plant species silenced by corporate decry, like your playlist being limited to one genre. As dusk settles outside, the shop's gas lamps flicker and hum. You sip the last drop of licorice elixir, savoring the astringent warmth at the back of your throat. A whiff of pine from the next bottle over triggers a memory of your grandmother's holiday. Cough drops, another example of simple remedies lost in the patent medicine maelstrom. You dot your index finger with a drop of iodine-based antiseptic that aches your nose with its steely bite. Then shake your head at how something so commonplace today once counted as secret formula. You step toward the door, the bell tinkling. Overhead, and the clerk offers you a small cardboard box of free kidney pills, a reminder that every visitor left with a parting gift. You tuck it into your coat pocket, feeling its reassuring weight. Outside, the gas lamps cast long shadows across the sidewalk. And you inhale the night air, tinged with coal smoke and horse manure, more pungent perfume than any shop elixir. As you walk away, you think about the patent barons who suppressed safer tonics, like that lupin seed remedy, or bullied young pharmacists into silence. Under the glimmer of gaslight, pharmacy shelves become battlegrounds where profits often outweighed patients' well-being. You shake off the vision of powdered quicksilver from Section 4 and mercury vials from Section 5. Grateful that at least modern regulations demand disclosure, though not perfect. They beat blind faith in every secret formula. Your footsteps echo down the lamplit street as you drift toward home. The click of your heels a lullaby to the ghostly figures of patent medicine pioneers. You almost hear their distant clamor, "Buy our cure." Nothing to lose but your aches. And you smile sleepily at the absurd continuity of human longing for quick fixes. A final breeze rustles the pages of your pocket notebook, where you've jotted down Beecher's bee sting serum recipe, just in case. You slip your hands into your coat pockets, the soft rustle of paper calming your thoughts. And you let the hum of 19th century ambition carry you into dreams of glass bottles, lily of Thavli, tinctures and remedies waiting to be rediscovered. You trudge along a rutted farm lane, the scent of damp hay and cow manure coiling around your ankles as you approach a low wooden fence. A brindled cow stares back at you with placid eyes, flecks of drool catching the afternoon sun. This is Gloucestershire in the late 18th century, where farmers once whispered of a magic fluid that could shield them from smallpox by borrowing a pinch of cowpox from their herd. Mainstream fact tells us that Edward Jenner published his inquiry into the causes and effects of the variolae vaccinae in 1798. Formalizing that folk practice into the first vaccine, you crouch beside farmer Benjamin Jesty, who nearly 2 decades earlier dared to scratch cowpox pus into his wife's and children's arms, convinced it would stop smallpox's scarlet march. It's a quirky tidbit that Jesty's neighbors thought he'd lost his mind. Some swore they saw his wife dancing naked in moonlight, convinced she'd become part cow, part human. You almost cough at the mental image of a half-mooing militia, but you swallow it down because the real drama is about to unfold. A breeze rustles the hedgerows and carries a distant carriage horn from the market town. You rise, dusting straw from your knees, and follow Jesty into a low-ceilinged barn where ragged straw mats line the floor. He plunges a needle into a pustule on the cow's udder and collects a thick drop of lymph in a glass vial. You lean in, feeling the glass's cool smoothness against your fingertips, and almost recoil at the thought that this crude fluid might contain living virus particles. That same year, a local physician named John Fooster heard rumors of cowpox use, but dismissed it as peasant superstition. Historians still argue whether Fooster's casual mention to Jenner planted the seed for the later breakthrough, or whether those hushed farmyard cures would have stayed unrecorded forever. Stare at the vial and imagine the scribbled notes. That could have ended up in a cluttered desk drawer, lost like a forgotten Instagram draft. You hitch your skirt on a nail and trudge toward town, clutching the vial like a secret treasure. Sunlight pools on cobbles worn smooth by mule wheels and boots. In the apothecary shop, shelves bow under jars of powdered rhino horn and snail mucus remedies sworn to cure everything from gout to heartbreak. You slip the vial behind a clattering row of mortars and pestles, careful not to disturb the pharmacist's meticulously labeled spices. 3 years later, Jenner arrives in this very shop, offering patrons milkmaids inoculations in exchange for a chicken pie and a pint of ale. You watch him scratch a tiny cut into a young girl's arm, Sarah Nelms, who later swore she felt nothing more than a mild itch. When smallpox stalks the village weeks later, she emerges unscathed, a living billboard for Jenner's vaccine. It's almost laughable to imagine today's vaccine trials requiring a pie and beer. But desperate times called for creative compensation. Word spreads to London, carried by carriage and letter. You follow Jenner down muddy streets toward the Royal Society premises in Somerset House, the air thick with horse dung and ambition. He presents his findings to presidents and fellows who sniffed at his rural accents, some claiming that only university-credentialed physicians deserved credit for medical miracles. Historians still argue whether the Society's initial lukewarm reception stemmed from scientific skepticism or class prejudice. You can almost hear ivory-towered professors tutting over their quills. Vaccination? Preposterous. Back on the cobbles, you pause beside a battered notice board plastered with handbills. One proclaims Jenner's vaccine safe as cow's milk. Another far subtler announces that a French physician, Tointasano, relation to Armand, had experimented with horsepox fluid. K-fringe tidbit nearly erased because his pamphlets were printed in a dusty provincial press. You lean closer, squinting to catch the fine print that states, results inconclusive. Further study recommended. That tiny disclaimer was enough for rival clinics to sink Toussaint's reputation, burying his work beneath official silence. A carriage clatters past, bearing a smug gentleman in a ruffled cravat. Jenner's supporters quickly lobbied Parliament, securing a Vaccine Act in 1840 that offered free inoculation for indigent children, but only underregistered vaccinators care. Meanwhile, private inoculators and fighting quacks were penalized. You shiver as you imagine a rogue healer hiding in a back alley, scarlet-stained arms trembling over a makeshift tray of lancets. Forced into the shadows by law rather than science, in 1853. A royal decree mandated vaccination for infants, and Jenner's name shone bright as a crown jewel yet whispers persisted. Some adepts claimed Martinus Harwood, a clerk turned self-taught physician, had vaccinated his own family years before Jenner's publication. His notes languished in a locked desk, until a great-grandson stumbled across them in 1882. Historians still argue whether Harwood's journal implied independent discovery, or was merely inspired by word-of-mouth rumors of milkmaid lore. You run your thumb over a yellowed page, yearning to see the faint script. Tested on son, no packs. But the text is too faded to confirm. You wander past the shop windows of Covent Garden. The aromatic haze of roasted chestnuts mingling with the brash cry of street preachers. One of them holds a tin megaphone declaring that vaccination is the work of the devil. A fringe conspiracy that took root in marginalized pamphlets. You almost pull out your smartphone to fact-check him. Then laugh technology would certainly help. But back then, people believed devils lived in cow's flesh more readily than in church sanctuaries. Your path curves toward a lamplit square, where candles flicker for late-night inoculations. A hush falls as veiled matrons clutch infants' clothes, tears glinting in their eyes aquill, parts fear and hope drawn taut. You smell burning tallow from a nearby lamp and feel the vibration of horse hooves. The vaccinator kneels, his steady hand guiding the bifurcated needle dipped in lymph. You taste the leather of your coat as you lean in, overwhelmed by the gravity of that moment, the very tipping point when borrowed cowpox turned from folk remedy to public health triumph. As the child's wail fades into snuffles, applause ripples through the crowd. Jenner's portrait emerges on broadsheets, but you recall Jesty's earlier farm trials uncelebrated. The moral sting bites deep. Cures born in humble barns often lose out to polished publications and polished accents. Even today, political campaigns and publishing heft can eclipse grassroots breakthroughs. Historians still argue whether Jenner's success depended on scientific rigor or on his flair for self-promotion and connections in high places. You step away from the square into a quiet side street, where a stray dog sniffs at discarded medical waste, a discarded set of lancets, and a stained rag. You bend to pet it, admiring its hopeful tail wag. If only forgotten pioneers could wag their tails too. Wagging at the thought that their suppressed cures finally found light in the hush. You almost hear the whisper of bruised confidence. Had I only presented my notes more loudly. A lamp sputters, and your footsteps grow slow as you retrace your path back to the farm lane. You pause one last time beside the fence, the cow now looming as its own testament to history's twists. You inhale the earthy breeze and murmur a soft thanks to those unheralded souls whose erased names still vibrate beneath the grass. The memory of pazzouged gloves, of clandestine barn experiments, and of Royal Society politics blend into a lullaby of what -ifse. Your eyelids droop. Dreams of rustic milking sheds and stately London halls converging into one gentle wave of sleep. You're cradled by the unsteady whisper of suppressed seeds of cure, waiting to bloom again in the curious mind of someone willing to look beyond the credit lines. You emerge from the hush of Jenner's Alley into the glare of early 20th century streetlights. Their electric coils humming like distant cicadas. Tron toward a gleaming storefront window plastered with bold serif letters. Radium. Water Aqua Viva. The neon glow flickers over bottles filled with pale blue liquid that seems to pulse from within. If you recall Galen's emerald salves, bee sting serums, K-pox, lymphanel. Imagine this. A promise that a single sip could rejuvenate your cells. Marie Curie isolated radium in 1898, revealing a new element whose radioactive glow mesmerized scientists and the public. Like a mainstream historical fact that set off a craze for anything radium-labeled. You step inside the polished tile shop, your shoes clicking on the black and white checkerboard floor. The air smells faintly of ozone and antiseptic, with a whisper of citrus from slender bottles of radium mouthwash displayed on mirrored shelves. A display case at the back holds luminous watch dials coated in radium paint, another quirky tidbit. Watchmakers' daughters once glowed in the dark after licking brushes to shape fine numeral hands, earning them the nickname Radium Girls. The tiny women suffered mysterious jaw necrosis, yet their plight only surfaced after years of corporate denials. A uniformed clerk offers you a delicate glass vial of Rodithor, an infamous blend of radium salts in distilled water, bottled by the secretive U.S. Radium Corporation. You pick it up gingerly, feeling its chill, as the clerk assures you it cures arthritis, impotence, and even insomnia. You almost snort at the mental image of someone chugging radioactive bedtime tea. But just then, you recall a news article that once billed radium-infused cosmetics as the height of sophistication. Madame Curie herself warned that her discovery was no harmless spa treatment. But salesmen preferred seductive promises over cautionary lectures. Behind you, the bell above the door jingles as a well-dressed doctor strides in carrying a polished, ebony case. He flips it open to reveal a handheld radium alpha-ray emitter. He demonstrates by placing it just above his palm, the glowing tip bathing his skin in violet light. He claims localized exposure can shrink tumors without surgery. It's a fringe therapy that dazzled oncologists at a Paris clinic until patients began suffering burns and internal hemorrhages. Historians still argue whether those early clinical trials were halted because of genuine safety concerns or because profitable pharmaceutical companies lobbied regulators to discredit radiation in favor of surgical fees. You follow the doctor to a back room where a reclining lounge chair awaits. He invites you to lie down, adjusting a small lead shield over your heart. The metallic taste of mint toothpaste lingers from the mouthwash he squirted into your mouth just moments ago. You recline as he positions a slender tube of radium salts, mere inches from your forehead. A low hum of lead-shielded machinery echoes in the background, mingling with the hum of your own pulse. You feel a warm hum on your brow as the clerk dims the lights. An odd cross between a tanning bed and a sci-fi movie set. Outside, on a crudely painted sign, someone has scribbled radiophobia. Don't believe the hype. In flickering lantern light. You chuckle at the callback to Section 5's unicorn floss, wondering if panaceas have always needed their own PR spin. As the radium glows against your eyelids, you let your mind drift, picturing a world where healing meant bathing in flickering particles. Yet somewhere beyond this neon-lit shop, coal-fired factories spewed soot thick enough to dull the night, and children labored in mines for pitchblende, or miners who later developed bone cancers from inhaled radium dust. The treatment ends as abruptly as it began. You sit up, blinking into the shop's cool fluorescent light. The doctor hands you a small pamphlet, your radium guarantee no refunds after use. You tuck it into your coat pocket, feeling the weight of its fine print. Outside, an uneasy murmur drifts down the sidewalk, whispers that Eben Byers, that wealthy industrialist, had downed hundreds of bottles of Rodithor and died of excruciating radiation necrosis. Yet for every Byers whose death made headlines, dozens of lesser-known patients quietly vanished. Their radium-infused bones discarded in unmarked graves. You wander past a newsstand where broadsheets rail against radium mania and demand government crackdown. The public fear swells, fueled by lurid images of glowing skulls and mutated tissues. Companies like U.S. Radium quietly bought off critics, funding small trials that downplayed harm and branded detractors as irrational alarmists. Historians still argue whether corporate censorship or genuine humanitarian concern catalyzed the eventual ban on ingestible radium products in the 1920s. Either way, the era's elixirs were destroyed or relegated to scientific museums behind lock and key. A drizzle begins to patter on the storefront sidewalk awning. You pull up your coat collar, tasting the metallic temps of rain mingled with ozone's strange company for radium's ghostly glow. You recall a fringe mention in a Parisian salon journal about radium-enriched chocolates, rumored to boost libido, on absurd notion that somehow merited a half paragraph before the editor censored it under pressure from chocolate magnates. You Can't help but grin at the image of jittery lovers bouncing off the walls after 1-2 many radium truffles. Your path leads you to a row of abandoned lab rooms, their windows boarded over with splintered wood. Faded posters proclaim radium baths cure rheumatism and shine on with radium toothpaste. Inside, you imagine gleaming instruments beeping and bubbling, test tubes of aquavita glowing like captured lightning. Someone, decades ago, bulldozed these labs under a veil of urban renewal, scattering radioactive debris into ordinary landfills. Locals still debate whether these demolitions were public health measures or conspiratorial cover-ups to erase inconvenient reminders of self-inflicted disasters. As you step into a patch of damp grass lit by a lone street lamp, you pry open your coat pouch and examine the pamphlet's final line. Consult your dealer before pregnancy. You shiver at the thought of unborn children exposed to ionizing rays, their DNA twisted like taffy. Modern oncology dosimeters would cringe at these ad hoc procedures. But the promise of radium's glow was too seductive to resist. You let the pamphlet flutter in the breeze, picturing it carried off into a gutter where it might end up in a landfill alongside broken watch dials, poisoned apple cores, and the relics of suppressed cures waiting to be rediscovered. A cat weaves around your ankles, its fur dappled like radioactive speckle. You bend to pet it, imagining it once prowled. The labs you just left, perhaps licking stray droplets of glow water from floors. The cat's eyes gleam emerald in the lamplight like fragments of Paracelsus's emerald dust from Section 2. Shimmering with hidden promise, you stand in the drizzle, the warm hum of distant traffic mingling with the faint hiss of old pipes. In the pavement, soft laughter bubbles up as you recall the crocodile dung sunscreen from Section 1. It's marveling that every era finds something bizarre to bottle as a cure. Your eyelids droop against the patter of rain. You tuck your hands into your pockets, feeling the pamphlet's edges rough against your fingertips. The night air coils around you like a lead-lined blanket, heavy with unspoken regrets and the echo of suppressed knowledge. As you wander toward home, you have to expect to glimpse a glowing bottle half buried beneath the sidewalker's silent testament to humanity's willingness to chase a cure, even if it burns from within. You wander down a narrow hallway in the University of Toronto's Connaught Laboratories. The floor tiles cool beneath your loafers, the bright overhead lights reflecting off stainless steel counters. The air carries a faint tang of formalin, and fresh cream left over from gelatin standards used to calibrate ASAs. It's late 1921, and you can almost hear the distant bark of lab dogs awaiting their turn on the dissecting table. You recall crocodile dung sunscreen, emerald dust bandages, and bee sting serums from earlier in our journey tonight. It's canine pancreases and fading glory that occupy your senses. You enter Banting's cluttered workroom and find Frederick. Banting hunched over an iceback tray of excised pancreatic tissue. He's just returned from tying off the pancreatic ducts of a dog, named Marjorie, one of many canines, he and medical student. Charles Best used to test whether eyelid extracts could reverse diabetes. That mainstay of medical lore. Banting and Best's experiments in May 1920, one pioneered insulin therapy, leading to Leonard Thompson's dramatic recovery in January 1922 and saving millions from certain death by diabetic coma. A mainstream historical fact as familiar as the scribbles on your own prescription pad. But you lean in closer to spot a curious fringe. Jotting on Banting's ledger, mention of a local Inuk healer in Newfoundland who soaked cod skins in snowmelt and fed them to diabetic sled dogs, noting improved stamina and less sweet-smelling urine. You almost choke on your evening tea at the thought of codskin stew as proto-insulin therapy. But sometimes folk cures sneak into Gothic labs under polite invitation. Historians still argue whether such indigenous anecdotes quietly influenced early experimental diets or were simply sidelined by Western Scientists keen on chemical isolation. Your hand brushes a brass plaque on the door. Cannot Antitoxin Laboratory. You step past and find James Collop, a biochemist with a meticulous bow tie, stirring a milky mixture of pancreatic extract into cold ethanol. He's halfway through his purification protocolonade process that uses alcohol, acid, and charcoal to strip out toxic proteins while preserving the vital hypoglycemic factor. You watch him swirl a glass flask until the mixture clarifies, then pour filtered liquid into dozens of tiny vials. You snort at the idea of marketing ethanol washed dog juice as a miracle cure. Thank goodness marketing teams stuck to sweeter names like insulin. Behind him, John McLeod paces, his clerical collar stiff beneath a lab coat. McLeod provided the lab space and crucial funding, but Banting claimed all the glory. You picture heated debates in the dean's office over rightful credit. Should McLeod's oversight warrant Nobel recognition alongside Banting and Collop? Historians still argue whether McLeod's managerial role was as pivotal as his name on the Nobel Prize awarded in 1923, or whether Banting's fury at the slight overshadowed true scientific contribution. You step closer to a wooden crate labeled patient doses, noticing the slight wiggle of numbered labels. Each vial carries enough insulin to halt a diabetic coma, but far too little to overdose an ironic calibration. Given earlier chapters, lethal mercury elixirs and radium cocktails, you uncork one vial and let a single droplet fall onto a glass slide. Under the ring lamp, the liquid catches flecks of dust, shimmering like distant stars captured in amber. A soft hiss of the lab's vacuum pump underlies the hush, a lullaby of scientific hope. In the corner, you see a battered stenographer's desk piled high with letters. One envelope, addressed to Banting from a British physician, mentions a botanical recipe using milk thistle seeds and wild fig sap that local villagers swore cut sugar levels almost as well as injected insulin. The letter was never answered. Instead, it joined a stack of unopened suggestions. You slide the letter into your pocket, its edges as crisp as a conspiracy theory waiting to bloom. At dawn's gray light, you accompany Banting and Best to the hospital ward. A young man, once drifting toward irreversible coma, sits up in bed, his cheeks flushed, fingers flexing with renewed strength. Nurses whispered that he looks 20 years younger. You trace your gaze to the bedside lantern, its oil lamp, flame flickering over glass vials lined like soldiers on a shelf. The room smells faintly of ether and linimenta, far cry from the metallic temps of radium water, yet every bit as miraculous to the patient's family. News spreads faster than any city hall decree. Labels reading Toronto Insulin March across newspaper headlines and medical journals. Big pharmaceutical firms in the United States and Europe, Lilly and May and Baker, snapped up licensing rights, stashing away credits for Banting and Best while paying Collop a flat fee. You nearly spit out your peppermint mint herbal tea at the corporate maneuvering. Patent profits soared, and some native collaborators saw none of it. Historians still argue whether the commercialization drove rapid global distribution or whether it betrayed the egalitarian spirit of life-saving science. You drift back to the lab's pantry, where tins of cane sugar sit next to jars of pancreatic granules. A single handwritten note warns, "Keep refrigerated, do not freeze." But a lab assistant jotted a quick Roger and stuck the vials in the icebox's freezer compartment. The next morning, half the batch was ruined insulin denatured by ice crystal punctures. You feel a pang of kinship with those botched batches, pondering how fragile this breakthrough was. Like a firefly blinking out in a closed jar, a fringe rumor surfaces in a whispered hallway conversation that German chemist Nikolai Pilescu had isolated a similar extract in 1916, but published in French Algerian. journals that Allied blockade prevented Banting's team from seeing. When Palescu later sued for recognition, he was dismissed as a nationalist crank rather than a legitimate rival. Okay? You press a finger to your lips, imagining suppressed tribute to an earlier pioneer whose work faded like radium baths under Urban Renewal or Paracelsus's skull-distilled rainwater under the weight of academic rivalry. As morning sun goldens the lab windows, you step outside and inhale traffic fumes mingled with the distant clatter of horse-drawn carts delivering beakers and pump parts. You tuck the Anouk codskin letter and the Palescu pamphlet into your coat pocket, tiny relics of sidelined voices in insulin's creation. Each step toward the hospital feels heavier than the last, loaded with the knowledge that cures can be lost not only by fire or flame, but by credit disputes, patent boondoggles, and academic gatekeeping. You pause by a cluster of newspapers pinned to a wooden bulletin board. Headlines read, "Insulin, Miracle of Modern Science and Patent. Wars Threaten Access." You recall the patent medicine barons from Section 6 who bulldozed rivals, the apothecary guilds from Section 4 who locked cures away, and the radium profiteers from Section 8 who lied about safety. The patterns repeat. Breakthroughs are as vulnerable to monopoly and ego as they are to nature's whims. Your eyelids grow heavy on that sunlit sidewalk. The distant hum of Model Ts blends with early morning bird calls, a lullaby of progress and profit mingled in the sharp scent of oil and asphalt. You brush your palm against your coat pocket, feeling the hidden notes of suppressed promise. A soft breeze carries a snippet of lab chatter, someone joking about Marjorie the dog's fame, another warning that new insulin batches need fresh ice. You tilt your head to the sky, feeling dawn's warmth cradle your thoughts. The clamor of Forbes lists and Nobel accolades seems distant here, replaced by the hush of dog kennels, lab benches, and hushed thank you notes lost in the mail. As you walk away from Connaught Labs, you almost hear Banting's quiet whisper. Insulin belongs to the world. Yet, in the hush behind you, the suppressed collaborators and sidelined cures mingle into one soft chorus. Your footsteps soften as you drift down the street. The world waking around you with street vendors shouting and bellboys ringing. You can't help but smile, remembering the hum of Paracelsus's retorts, the hiss of radium emitters, and the clack of mortar and pestle. Now, insulin's story pulses in your veins like a secret melody, fragile, contested, and waiting to be retold. You've stepped into a dimly lit bacteriology lab circa 1919, where the tang of phenol and the hiss of Bunsen burners mingle in the stale air. Your shoes echo on tiled floors stained by spilled agar, and you nearly trip over a crate of Petri dishes, marked Staphylococcus. Alexander Fleming's accidental discovery of lysozyme in 1922 lies just around the corner. But tonight, you're here for earlier antibacterial experiments that fizzled before penicillin's spotlight. Paul Ehrlich's magic bullet salvarsan, synthesized in 1909 to cure syphilis, was the first antimicrobial chemotherapy saving countless lives and earning him a Nobel Prize. It's a mainstream historical fact that still dazzles microbiologists. You inhale the acrid scent of aniline dyes, and I, a low wooden workbench piled with vials of sodium arsenite and boracic acid. A paper label reads Compound 606, Ehrlich's codename for solvarsan, its metallic sheen glinting in lamplight. The chemist's fringe notes tucked into a drawer mention an experimental compound 999 rumored to cure pneumonia. But dwindling public funds and industrial backers forced Ehrlich to abandon that line of research. Historians still argue whether those sidetracked compounds held true antibacterial promise, or were simply dangerous detours in early drug screening. Lab assistant in a rumpled white coat offers you a glass of phage broth, a cloudy concoction. Seeded with bacteriophages, isolated by Felix Terrell in 1917. You raise an eyebrow, picturing microscopic viruses punching bacterial membranes like tiny karate chops. Some fringe aficionados claimed these phages could be harvested from municipal sewage and applied directly to infected wounds. An image so unappetizing you almost gag on a whiff of the formaldehyde fumes. Yet early reports of phage therapy curing dysentery in children inspired wild optimism before chemical antibiotics arrived. You glide your fingertips along a shelf of freshly poured culture plates, their surfaces speckled like constellations under dim lamps. The assistant points to one plate overrun with blue-green mold Penicillium nototum. It's the very mold that would soon yield Fleming's groundbreaking penicillin in 1928. But here, 8 years earlier, there's no rush to study mold colonies, producing antibacterial zones. Industry focused on synthetic dyes and arsenical drugs instead. Corporate labs happily funded salvarsan derivatives, but balked at fermenting an unpredictable fungus. You can almost hear a boardroom meeting. Mold, it's hardly scalable back to the benchtop boys. A rat scuttles in a nearby cage, its fur matted. With test solutions, researchers once applied salvarsan paste to rodent abscesses in hopes of refining dosages. After a week, some rodents showed signs of arsenic poisoning, pockmarked skin, and tremors prompting whispers that rheumatism patients might fare worse than their rats. You scratch your nose and wonder whether any salvarsan survivors felt better or just luckier. The lab's lead researcher scratched next. Compound 1121. In a corner notebook, another fringe trial abandoned when arsenic fumes corroded metal. Equipment. You step into an adjoining room where a row of glass fermenters churn with oatmeal medium. The head technician, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, swabs a spore bank of unknown origin. He confides that a French hygienist once submitted a sample of crusty bread as a secret phage reservoir. After hearing folktales of rural healers bathing ulcers in fermented dough, the idea of bread therapy makes your stomach lurch. But rural clinics reported anecdotal success until regulators banned unpasteurized remedies. Historians still argue whether these bread-derived bacteriophages outperformed early sulfa drugs or simply provided placebo reassurance to desperate patients. Your sense is real as you handle a jeweled syringe filled with turpentine emulsion, a mother fringe antiseptic once hyped to dissolve pus in gangrene patients. You almost spill it on your hand before recalling that turpentine scent can strip paint and stubborn varnish. It leaves a skin-prickling burn, yet some surgeons championed it over surgical amputation, believing in its necrosis-clearing power. You laugh at the thought of today's OR staff swapping scalpels for pine resin, scalpeling gone woody. You mutter. A sudden clink draws your gaze to a cabinet of leather-bound journals. You flip to an entry dated 1913. 9 patients injected with phenolic serum. 3 improved, 2 worsened, remainder static. You trace the looping handwriting with your fingertip and wonder if those patients believed they were guinea pigs or pioneers. Private firms marketed phenol lotions for skin infections, but clinical skepticism and inconsistent results squashed large-scale adoption until sulfonamides arrived. You drift back to the fermenters as the technician distills a pale yellow liquid called creosote solution. Coal tar derivatives once treated tuberculosis by inhalation. It's administered through early nebulizers that dripped soot into patients' lungs. The fringe potency of coal waste may have killed bacteria, but patients coughed up black phlegm and begged for sweet cough syrups instead. You cough along with them, tasting a hint of burnt coal on your tongue. The lab's brass clock ticks past midnight, and you sense the exhaustion hanging over every flask. You picture Fleming walking by years later with a forgotten culture plate. That changed everything yet at this moment. No one sees the mold zone as a momentous sign. Instead, corporate chemists jutted budgets toward refining salvarsan derivatives and dye-based germicides. Penicillin's future lay hidden in that mold, waiting for a solitary note and a curious mind to lift the lid on microbial warfare. You allow your fingers to linger on a discarded champagne bottle once used to test pressure resilience in sealed fermenters. A scrawled note on its label reads, "Tested at 30 site ideal for sealed antibiotic production." But no one ran with the idea. Glass recycling seemed more punctual than pharmaceutical innovation. You shake your head at the thought that a bubble in a pressure tester had more real estate on the lab bench than that moldy dish. Your eyelids grow heavy as you make your way back to the entrance. You inhale one last whiff of formaldehyde and stale culture media, tasting the bittersweet essence of promise deferred. You recall the rat cages, the phage broth, the arsenic vials heaped in a dusty corner. You imagine a lab notebook left open on a bench, its final line unfinished. Next step, pilot penicillin fermenter. But the page remains blank as you drift through the lab's shadowed threshold. You almost hear an unseen researcher whisper, "Our cure grows invisible in spores." You step into the night's cool air, where the distant hum of automobiles replaces the Bunsen burner's hiss. A stray breeze carries the faint stench of coal smoke and exhaust. And you let it lull you toward sleep, pondering how close science came to penicillin and how many earlier cures were lost before that life-saving mold emerged. You pad down a linoleum corridor lit by buzzing fluorescents. The air thick with antiseptic and stale coffee that's been reheated one time too many. Framed charts of Rorschach ink blots and weary faces line the walls, and somewhere a nurse rattles. A cart of pill-sharp clinks like a slot machine you never win. You remember the moldy Petri dishes from Section 10, whispering of penicillin's near miss. And now you find yourself in a 1950s psychiatric research wing where a different revolution awaits in micrograms. LSD, first synthesized by Albert Hofmann in 1938 and intentionally ingested in 1943. LSD's mind-bending potential dazzled psychiatrists seeking cures for alcoholism, depression, and psychosis. Mainstream historical fact glibly noted in every psychopharmacology textbook. You step into an observation room where two swivel chairs face a one-way mirror. The walls echo with the faint hum of an old tape recorder playing a jazz record at half-speed experimental technique meant to tune brainwaves, according to one fringe protocol scribbled on a peeling index card. A phalanx of glass vials glints on a stainless steel tray, LSD doses measured in micrograms, so potent that a single grain of table salt could hold 10 hits. You almost chuckle at the mental image of someone asking for a teaspoon of LSD at a modern coffee shop. Yes, extra stir. Hold the foam. You lean against the doorway and inhale deeply, tasting faint citrus from leftover vitamin C tablets and the antiseptic sting of isopropyl alcohol. A young psychiatrist in a white coat adjusts the dosing apparatus, its gleaming syringe and a calibrated dropper that seems more like a jeweler's tool than medical gear. He describes how, in the early 1950s, the CIA funded Operation MKUltra to explore mind control and chemical interrogation, surreptitiously dosing unwitting subjects in universities and bars. You wrinkle your nose at the thought of dropping LSD into someone's coffee, then realize that if your barista tried that today, you'd get $1 million lawsuit and at least a scathing Yelp review. As the doctor prepares a dose, you spot a faded map on the wall pinpointing field test cities like San Francisco and New York sites, where psychiatrists surreptitiously dosed behavioral patients. A quirky tidbit flutters in your mind. In one MKUltra subproject, researchers attempted to dissolve microdots in chewing gum and plaster them inside diplomats' shoes. You imagine a 1960s ambassador chewing gum and suddenly giggling uncontrollably during a UN address. Your Excellency, do you see dancing jelly beans behind those drapes? Absurd as it sounds, this clandestine gum protocol actually passed. Through ethics committees or, at least what passed for ethics in shadowy CIA basements. A patient arrives, her eyes wide as brass doorknobs, clutching a torn paperback of Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception. She reveals that her therapist prescribed microdoses of LSD to ease her heroin cravings and alleviate PTSD flashbacks. Historians still argue whether those early psychotherapeutic trials yielded genuine healing or simply primed subjects for post-experiment burnout. You can almost hear the hushed debates in decades-old journals. Is the mystical experience a fleeting placebo? Or does LSD genuinely rewire brain circuits? The psychiatrist hands the patient a tiny sugar cube soaked in acid. She hesitates, then tucks it under her tongue like a tic-tac. You feel the antiseptic floor beneath your sneakers grow slick with anticipation. Outside the observation window, a technician flicks on a tape recorder and dims the lights, replacing the fluorescent glare with soft amber bulbs and intentional mood shift meant to coax open suppressed emotions. If you recall crocodile dung sunscreen. From Section 1, imagining a similar environmental conditioning. First, apply dung, then feed LSD. Finally, sing folk songs under a banyan tree. In hushed tones, the doctor explains how by 1966, LSD therapy peaked at around 1,000 global research projects, funded by universities, mental hospitals, and private foundations. Yet by the time the Beatles popularized it as Lucy in the Sky, moral panic ignited legislative bans across the US and UK. You sigh at the irony. Research assistants once calculated precise psychotropic dosages, now replaced by casual I-tripped at Woodstock anecdotes. Academic funding dried up, and thousands of patient records were burned under government orders, an ominous ritual that ensured few detailed protocols survived. Historians still argue whether political backlash or actual safety concerns shuddered. These promising studies, you follow the patient into a softly carpeted room lined with plush armchairs and potted ferns, an attempt at humanizing the sterile clinic. She settles in, eyes fluttering as the acid kicks in. You watch her pupils dilate like black marbles, her breath deepening. A tape of distant church bells begins to play as part of a sonic therapy regimen, an auditory layering meant to evoke transcendence. A technician adjusts the volume, and suddenly you're serenaded by muffled bell tones. It's like a lost cathedral deep underwater. You taste lingering coffee on your tongue and feel a prickle of vertigo at the thought that a single molecule could reshape your entire worldview. A knock on the door reveals a bearded researcher carrying a tray of experimental psychogastronomy snacks, freeze-dried bell peppers coated in saffron extract, rumored to amplify hallucinations. You wince at the pairing, LSD and saffron pepper pops. The researcher admits they once tested kombucha brews infused with mescaline extracted from peyote buttons, hoping for a gentler psyche primer. You try to imagine sipping spiced kombucha while discussing Freud's trauma theories, but your stomach churns at the improbable menu as the patient drifts into her acid-fueled journey. You step outside the room and lean against the wall. You run a finger along spidery cracks in the plaster, feeling the roughness beneath your fingertip. You can almost hear the echo of a 1960s protest chant, "Turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream," and you wonder if researchers ever played Jefferson Airplane to study group therapy dynamics. Fringe records mention therapeutic playlists, but lack concrete details, likely expunged by bureaucrats who preferred black ink to psychedelic color. You wander back into the observation room just as the patient giggles softly, tracing invisible fractals in the air. You slide into a swivel chair and swivel to take in the scene. She's scribbling psychedelic mandalas on a legal pad, tears and laughter mixing in a single breath. The psychiatrist whispers that some alcoholics who failed every other treatment smashed their last drink after a guided LSD session. A phenomenon now echoed by modern trials where MDMA-assisted therapy shows promise treating PTSD. You whisper, a mental high five to those pioneering souls who dared to break law rather than break patient spirits. But the mood shifts when you notice a thick file stamped CIA Evidence DK on the table. The doctor's brow furrows as he mentions that 2 vials of LSD vanished last week. Security protocols require the files to vanish too, he says quietly, glancing toward a locked cabinet. He jokes that the next test subject might be him, an ironic self-experiment after the therapists ran out of guinea pigs. You half smile, imagining a white Coten-cased clown daring colleagues to chase him down the hall under fluorescent glare. You slip away into the hallway, the antiseptic scent clinging to your nostrils like a stubborn memory. A corridor light flickers, and you spot a tiny hand-lettered sign, Microdose Group, meets here Fridays, BYO Coffee. You imagine a modern meet laptops open, people charting mood swings in a Google spreadsheet, then chuckle at how even fringe cures go corporate eventually. As you drift toward the exit, you pass an old Philips head shaving station where a technician once rigged electrodes to map brainwave patterns during psychedelic peaks. You trace your finger over burn marks on the chrome shelf, feeling the residual hum of past experiments. You wonder how many brilliant protocols died in those scraps of metal when funding vanished and moral panic took hold, or without a public record. Those whispered techniques faded like radium-laced toothpaste. Lost in cultural meltdown, you step into the humid night air, and a breeze carries the sweet temps of jasmine from a nearby garden. You taste it on your lips as you tilt your head back, the patient's distant laughter still echoing in your mind. You recall Paracelsus's mercury elixirs, radium water, and patent medicine, arsenals each suppressed by rivalry, politics, or profit. Now LSD's story joins that lineage, a healing wonder co-opted by covert operations, then crushed by fear of the unknown. Your eyelids grow heavy under the street lamp's glow. You tuck the memory of psychedelic jazz and mandala sketches into your coat pocket, alongside flashcards of acid doses you'll never administer. The jasmine breeze swirls, and you sense your thoughts blurring into that ethereal place where consciousness expands and contracts like living art. A faint hum of traffic blends with the distant hum of fluorescent labs, and you let the world spin one last time before stepping into sleep's embrace, wondering which suppressed cure you'll discover next. You step out of that hushed psychiatric wing into a warm summer evening, the street lamps casting long halos on cracked pavement. A breeze carries a faint whiff of jasmine and asphalt scent cocktail as unplanned as psychedelic jazz improvised by anxious researchers. You've just watched acid-fueled mandalas bloom behind one-way glass. Now another suppressed wonder waits in the wings. You trail your fingers along a wrought iron fence around a silent botanical garden, recalling the hint of saffron crackers from Section 11, and wondering which green remedy you'll uncover next. You slip through an open gate and wander among neatly pruned beds of lavender and thyme until a cluster of tall serrated leaves catches your eye. The curator's placard reads Cannabis sativa L. Medicinal hemp. Mainstream historical fact. 19th century American physicians listed cannabis extracts in the United States Pharmacopoeia from 1850 to 1942, leasing them to treat migraines, muscle spasms, and menstrual cramps. You inhale the plant's earthy, skunky aroma like gym socks, fresh from a pine forest, and imagine a doctor dissolving. Hemp resin in alcohol to calm a patient's nerves. You brush past a hedgerow and find a hidden alcove where dusty scrolls lie on a marble bench. One document, dated 1913, extols a fringe remedy: cannabis-infused Labrador tea used by Inuit hunters to stave off frostbite pain. You giggle at the image of a wool-clad trapper sipping joint tea under the northern lights, cheek pink from cold and THC alike. Scholars still argue whether cannabinoids truly ease neuropathic pain or if indigenous accounts reflect placebo sprinkled with folklore. You tuck the scroll beneath your arm and feel its rough linen envelope against your palm. A gardener watering rosebushes glances up as you meander deeper. You inhale the faint sweetness of petals mingled with that pungent cannabis note. And you wonder how the two fragrances layered for ancient apothecaries. Near a weathered sundial, you uncover a hidden trapdoor leading to an underground apothecary archive. Its black iron latch creaks like a disclaimer from Section 6's patent medicine cabinets. You push it open and descend a spiral staircase, each step echoing with the promise of buried botanical lore at the bottom. Lantern light flickers over oak shelves, stocked with amber-tinted apothecary jars, bearing ornate calligraphy: tincture, ganjae, unguentum, cannabis, and suppositoria chronicus. You inhale a bouquet of lavender honey cannabis salve, wafting from one Jera-soothing balm once prescribed for rheumatism. A quirky tidbit scribbled on a side label claims, Victorian ladies used ganja suppositories to preempt wedding night jitters. You smirk at the Victorian euphemism: quiet nerves. Indeed, I'd imagine a lace-clad duchess sneaking one under corset stays. Across the table, you spot a battered ledger listing wholesale orders to prestigious hospitals: Johns Hopkins, Bellevue, St. Thomas's. But you also see a stark notation: Post-Marijuana Tax Act. 1937, all facilities cease ganja orders. You brush fingertips over the fine print that reveals how Congress imposed a crushing $1 announced tax, roughly $20 today, plus onerous paperwork on anyone handling cannabis. Historians still argue whether the act targeted genuine health risks or served as a political tool to suppress immigrant-driven remedy traditions. The pages crackle under your touch, carrying the weight of bureaucratic oblivion. You wander toward a polished walnut desk, illuminated by a single kerosene lamp. On it lies a yellowed 1936 pamphlet: Marijuana, Assassin of Youth, produced by a federal propaganda office. The cover illustration shows a wide-eyed jazz musician turned into a snapping reptile under a smoking joint, an odd fringe metaphor that conflated cannabis with moral decay. You stifle a laugh at the cartoon's absurdity. Today's graphic designers would win awards, but you shiver when you recall the real victims: patients denied muscle spasm relief and soldiers forbidden to self-medicate battle scars. A brass key dangles on a ribbon nearby, unlocking a heavy safe embedded in the wall. You turn it with a satisfying click and lift the lid to reveal a collection of glass syringes pre-filled with standardized cannabis oil. Martin Lee's Cannabis Pharmacopoeia blueprint, come to life decades before recreational dispensaries. There's a vial tagged Dr. William O'Shaughnessy, -1843. Commemorating the first medical study on Indian hemp's effectiveness in treating cholera and rabies. You almost drip a bead on your finger to savor its bitter herbal sting, but you bottle it back with reverence. On a marble plinth stands a field notebook from 1925, penned by New York City physician Dr. Kenneth Appel. You flip it open too early. Entries about using oral cannabis for glaucoma patients, noting the fringe side note: some patients report seeing geometric patterns if dose greater than 10 milligrams. You grin at the callback to mandalas in section 11, and you muse on how sensory crossovers repeat like seed cycles across centuries. Scholars still argue whether cannabinoids, intraocular pressure reduction measured in clinical settings, trumps anecdotal reports of visual hallucinations. A soft drip echoes in the archives, gloom a leaking vial of hemp extract dripping onto terracotta floor tiles. You follow the trail to a forgotten corner where a 1937 invoice lies half-soaked. Bulk cannabis resin exported from Panama to Chicago. The blotchy writing reveals import duties never paid and crate receipts never filed, a clandestine pipeline that died under enforced tax surcharges. You run a fingertip across the blurred numbers. Tasting the tang of suppressed commerce, you rise and wander toward a narrow corridor where modern government records share space with apothecary relics. You pass an early 1950s federal memo recommending reclassification of cannabis from medicine to narcotic, based on propaganda reports rather than pharmacological evidence. You lean in close, feeling your breath fog the typed letters, and you note how key sentences were redacted long ago, black bars, more censorious than cathedral burnings in section 1. The redactions feel like scars across medical history up ahead. A glass display case showcases a 1964 letter from Israel's Raphael Mechoulam to American colleagues urging cannabinoid isolation. His discovery of THC's chemical structure never gained government support until the 1990s, an ironic lag, considering US patent 6,630,507 cited synthetic THC as neuroprotective. You exhale slowly, imagining a parallel past where cannabis research received the same fervor as penicillin screening or LSD trials. Historians still argue whether US research delays stemmed from Cold War politics or from bureaucratic inertia. You gather a small pile of pamphlets, healthcare. It's white papers from the 1940s advocating cannabis for wartime pain relief, buried under layers of obsolescent cellulose. You tuck them into a satchel and pad up the spiral stairs, each step carrying the scent of parchment and unspoken hope. The night air greets you at the surface with a rustle of leaves and the distant hum of a passing taxi. You breathe in the cool breeze, tasting hints of urban exhaust and the faintest trace of herbal cannabis, like a promise carried on the wind. Walking home, you pass a neon sign for a new vape lounge proudly advertising CBD cocktails. You smile wryly. What was once a criminal contraband has become artisanal garnish. A jazz trio plays inside, and you spot patrons swirling cocktails with hemp-infused bitters. You imagine they have no idea of the vaults beneath this city holding centuries of suppressed cannabis cures. Your eyelids flutter as you round the corner, and the evening scents swirl together: jasmine, asphalt, antiseptic, hemp resin mingling. Like a botanical choir, you feel the hum of untapped potential settle into your chest, a gentle thrum akin to LSD's final echo. You step inside your front door, satchel heavy with rescued remedies and repressed records. You cradle it against your hip. The silence greets you, and you let your thoughts drift to political pressures, racial biases, and scientific debates that cast cannabis into shadow. You slip out of your coat, hang it on a peg, and pour a glass of water infused with a single drop of rooftop-grown hemp, tincture your own modest reintegration of a once-hidden cure. You sip, letting its earthy bitterness coat your throat, and you recall the curator's placard promising medicinal hemp. Now that promise rests inside you, restored from bureaucratic exile. Your vision softens, the arcane manuscripts whisper on your bedside table, and you sense sleep's gentle pull. You close the door quietly and let the night carry the furtive aroma of cannabis through your window, crack an invitation for tomorrow's dreams. You step into a gleaming glass atrium scented with polished chrome and recycled coffee, the hum of air conditioning whispering in your ears like a lullaby for commerce. You're here for a meeting between a scrappy herbal startup and a pharmaceutical behemoth, two worlds about to collide beneath corporate skylights. Your heels click on the terrazzo floor as you pass a bank of digital screens flashing. Innovation Summit 2025 and Disrupt or Be Disrupted. You recall the rabbit's stew aroma of the medieval apothecary section for Dom, the temps of radium-laced water, section 8. And now you're immersed in the sanitized frontier of patent lawyers and lobbyists. Lacquered receptionist slides you a badge. Herbapure versus Pharmamax. You slip it onto your lapel, its weight reminding you of Paracelsus's Mercury Flask, section 5, and Vin's Clandestine. Codskin Notes, section 9. Tasting cold polyester and mint gum minty fresh. Enough to mask the herbal street fairs in your dreams. Ahead, a pair of suited negotiators, one sporting a crisp white coat, the other, a hemp fiber lapel pin shake, hands over a boardroom table. The size of a ping-pong court. You slide into a black leather chair, adjusting the small pile of brochures. Beside you, 100% trumpet honeysuckle extract. Patented ginkgo nanocaps. Synthetic ephedrine versus natural ephedra. A comparative study. A mainstream historical fact. The dietary supplement, health, and education. Act of 1994 Shea opened America's doors to billion-dollar herbal supplements. Mandating label honesty, but shielding companies from rigorous FDA drug approval. You trace your fingertip along the fine print. This statement has not been evaluated by the FDA. It feels like the medieval herbals tucked under gospel bindings label disclaimers, serving as the modern equivalent of clandestine ritual. Seals. The Pharmamax rep, a silver-haired executive with inhumanly white teeth, taps a touchscreen tablet and the table lights up with graphs. Market share, growth projections, litigation threats. Ginkgo sales cut into our synthetic nootropics division by 12% last quarter, he intones. You almost snort. Synthetic nootropics that cost 10 times the ginkgo extract yet boast clinically unverified neuroprotective claims. A fringe tidbit flashes in your mind. Sovietira brain tonic injected deer antler essence into cosmonauts to boost cognition. You picture a moose antler-fueled Yuri Gagarin floating through orbit, muttering, spirits, not just spuds. The Herbapure founder, a wiry woman wearing sandals and a linen blazer, counters with soft intensity. Our twin blind trials show 68% improvement in episodic memory with standardized ginkgo tablets comparable to your proprietary compound. She slides a vial of pale gold extract across the table. The liquid catches overhead leads and glows faintly like that forgotten radium mouthwash, section 8. You inhale its subtly acrid, centery, moss-like, and oddly reassuring. The smell of ancient forests and whispered remedies. A callback to the Chinese herbarium where ginseng roots looked like tiny humans, section 3. A. Hush falls as the Pharmamax rep swipes a holographic projection, while ginkgo extracts history dates to Temps dynasty pharmacopoeias. Modern phytochemical composition is variable. Quality control is your Achilles heel. Historians still argue whether variability in plant compounds stems from terroir differences or inconsistent extraction methods. You feel a familiar twinge academic gatekeeping, echoing the same ecclesiastical edicts that once banned Galen's vivisections, section 2. The negotiation intensifies. Term sheets, non-disclosure clauses, right of first refusal on new herbal patents. A lawyer jokes about filing geographic indications for Belizean oregano to block. Caribbean uplifts another layer of corporate trench warfare on plant lore. You bite back a grin, recalling how medieval apothecaries fined rival healers for copying rosewater distillation, section 4. Now it's global trade law instead of stocks and stocks of dried herbs. Suddenly, The Herbapure founder presents a trophy-like glass award, 2018 Bioprospecting Pioneer, scribed for her discovery of a potent anti-inflammatory compound in West African bitter cola nuts. You leaf through her presentation: chemical fingerprinting, preclinical rodent studies, promising safety profile. But then comes the catch: a clause granting PharmaMax exclusive global rights to any derivative, effectively silencing independent trials. You taste stale coffee and corporate ambition coating your tongue. You recall paclitaxel, the blockbuster chemotherapy drug isolated from the Pacific U in the 1960s. The U.S. government paid a pittance to harvest trees before patenting the synthetic formulation. Fringe whispers told of felled forests buried under NDA seals. Historians still argue whether that corporate-government partnership saved lives or commodified biodiversity for profit. You feel a Pancud bitter cola suffered the same fate. Its healer's remedy turned into a locked vault of royalties. The PharmaMax rep leans back, swirling a glass of water like a sommelier sniffing a fine wine. We propose a 70/30ths revenue split after R&D recoupment, he says. You wince at the suggestion Herbapure would shoulder all the safety trials while PharmaMax stamps its logo on the label. It's reminiscent of how insulin collaborators saw flat licensing fees while Lilly raked in company profits, Section 9. You remember Banting's anger when McLeod got Nobel recognition and realized corporate appropriation has deeper roots than you thought. The founder closes her eyes briefly, then nods. Only if we retain the right to publish all safety data and field test results without suppression, she counters. The PharmaMax rep's smile falters. Transparency's terrifying in a world built on pay-to-play exclusivity. You gaze at the glowing screens and think of LSD trials burned under MKULTRA cover-ups, Section 11. Cannabis records redacted by propaganda, Section 12. The memory of suppressed cures flares in your chest. Ancient potions, plague powders, juju remedies, how many lives hinged on whose ledger saw the light? A silent alarm blinks in the corner, unnoticed by the negotiators. You feel a soft exhale of air conditioning, the atrium's hum briefly a roar. You lean forward, savoring the scent of mint gum in your mouth, and whisper in your mind. Lock and key may change from temple vaults to patent lob. The pattern remains. The PharmaMax rep glances up, as if sensing your thought, then shifts position, steepling his fingers. The founder rises, her flip-flops whispering on terrazzo. She places her hand on the extractor vial. We accept your terms, she says, but then pauses. Provided the final agreement includes a clause preventing any synthetic copycat patent for 10 years. The last-ditch gambit calling. Back to Geerda's hex, on unicorn horn patents, Section 2. A modern talisman against unscrupulous appropriation. You exhale. Feeling the collective weight in the room, pivot on her words. The PharmaMax rep hesitates, exchanges a glance with his counsel, then nods. Agreed, with the caveat that any derivative assets revert to PharmaMax if Herbapure sells or dissolves. You taste the corporate compromise. Even protective clauses come with strings. It's a velvet-lined cage, reminding you of how oils vanished under Ecclesiastical Rule Section 2, and bloodletting licenses once expired by fiat. The founder offers her hand, and the PharmaMax rep shakes it. You feel the imprinted grip of suppressed potential, the honeyed cola extract, now forever entwined with profit margins. A thin veil of jasmine-scented diffuser oil wafts through a side vent, an ostentatious nod to wellness decor, stolen from boutique spas. You recall the smell of jasmine outside the psychiatric wing and murmur a half-joke. At least they didn't mix it with LSD. You gather your brochures and slip out onto the terrazzo floor. The atrium lights painting long beams. Across the space, you taste the lingering temps of mint and bitter cola on your tongue. A final thought drifts through your mind. In every era, Power brokers decide which cures see clinical trials and which fade into folklore. You smile sleepily at the echo of that truth, slipping through revolving doors into the night air. The car horns, the distant drone of city traffic, and the faint perfume of urban blossoms lull you toward home, mind spinning with suppressed cures still waiting to breathe free. You drift down a fluorescent-lit hallway lined with laminated DNA safety posters, the soft hum of a ventilation grate mixing with the antiseptic temps of ethanol. Your steps echo on sterile linoleum as you approach a squat brick building tucked behind. It's the university's gleaming research towers. Here, in the early 1970s, a handful of bold scientists first dared to slip healthy genes into human cells mainstream. Historical fact tells you that in 1973, Theodore Friedman and Richard Roblin published the foundational concept of gene therapy, laying the blueprint for trials that would follow, pushing open a heavy metal door. You enter a makeshift gene transfer lab where polycarbonate biosafety cabinets glow under red warning lights. You pause at a workbench strewn with pipettes, glass culture flasks, and stacks of protocol folders stamped confidential. The air is a cocktail of disinfectant, hot plastic from a recently autoclaved grafting device, and a faint undertone of old coffee sacrificed for late-night vector preparations. A dangling rack of microcentrifuge tubes rattles as you step by, reminding you of chattering skeleton keys from Section 5's Paracelsian vaults. A young postdoc gestures excitedly at an open notebook. In crisp handwriting, you find details of the first human gen transfer attempt, led by Martin Klein at UCLA in 1980, infusing genetically modified bone marrow cells, into leukemia patients in hopes of reprogramming their immune systems. The mainstream record notes minimal clinical success, but the trial was halted amid ethical uproar and regulatory intervention. Historians still argue whether Klein's protocol broke safety norms or whether the FDA's heavy hands stifled promising innovation. You lean over a styrofoam cooler filled with frozen, viral vector strips of polyethylene glycol-coated retrovirus that glint like alien microcapsules. A handwritten label reads Mum LV Beta Globin, Batch 12, and you almost snort at the batch number's mundanity. A fringe footnote in a forgotten grant proposal mentions injecting similar vectors into sea urchin eggs to observe gene integration, an odd detour that some colleagues dismissed as aquatic hobbyism. Yet yield patterns hinted at novel viral tropism. A tingle of anxiety crawls up your spine as you recall the hushed controversy over patent filings. You flip through a folder marked IP Review and see competing claims by the university's tech transfer office and a private biotech startup. Retroviral vectors were treated like gold nuggets. Licensing deals threatened to drag every experimental protocol into court instead of the clinic. Some researchers believed that patent disputes delayed patient access more than technical hurdles. Scholars still argue whether intellectual property law nurtured innovation or erected paywalls that choked early gene therapy momentum. You wander into the cell culture room, where rows of incubators hiss and emit soft green glows from petri dishes. A faint scent of agar and sodium bicarbonate drifts from the 37 degrees Celsius chambers. A researcher holds up a flask of HeLa cells glowing with GFP expression, a quirky fringe tidbit. They'd borrowed jellyfish genes to track viral entry. Long before glow-in-the-dark proteins became everyday lab staples. You watch the cells shimmer under blue light and imagine cartoon bioluminescent humans strolling through campuses, gossiping in glow patterns. Nearby, refrigerator door squeaks as a technician retrieves vials of liposome-encapsulated plasmid DNA. You catch a wisp of tropical fruit scent, an additive to mask the plasmid solution's sour odor. Liposome-mediated transfer aimed to bypass viral safety concerns, but low uptake efficiency frustrated trial outcomes. You sigh at the thought of a patient sipping something that smelled like pineapple soda. Drink up for your DNA upgrade. To see minimal gene expression. A soft beep draws you to a computer terminal running early bioinformatics software. A green phosphor screen lists patient IDs and transgene expression levels. The rows of data flicker as you scroll. Some patients showed transient protein production, others none at all. You lean back and taste the metallic sting of EEG gel still clinging to your fingertips from a previous psychology study. Another echo of Section 11's LSD-mounted brainwave sessions. The lab's lead investigator strides in, peeling off his disposable gloves with surgical precision. He explains how by 1975, the National Institutes of Health had convened bioethics panels to draft safety guidelines, forcing researchers to add suicide genes, built-in self-destruct switches in case the retrovirus went rogue. The concept sounds like science fiction, but some fringe proposals once suggested triggering gene-expressing cells with handheld UV flashlights. You giggle at the image of scientists running around labs flashing lights like paranormal investigators. He pauses at a whiteboard scrawled with future project ideas. Kyogeny infusion in SID children, chorioderemia, retinal cell injection, hemophilia 8 correction via adenovirus. The last bullet is circled in blue marker. You imagine a toddler's tearful smile as he receives a one-time dose that could spare him from Bleeds for Life, a dream nearly derailed by patent battles over the ADA gene several years later. The lead investigator admits, in a hushed tone, that corporate patents on viral vectors threaten to sideline critical trials. Historians still argue whether delayed Otskide therapies were casualties of IP skirmishes or genuine. Safety re CALIBRATIONS. Your gaze drifts past a stack of discarded magazines showing futuristic art, gleaming cyborgs with silver veins and neural plugs, the world's overenthusiastic vision of gene therapy. A fringe pamphlet pinned underneath proclaims DNA vaccines for the next smallpox. Enthusiasm crackles in the margins, yet funding dried up when public fear of playing God collided with memories of previous controversies. You move to a cold metal table where glass slides rest on a light box, each slide bearing a single stained cell with visible chromosomal integration, tiny red dots marking successful gene insertions. You press your nose close and taste the antiseptic on the air. There's a dizzying beauty in those red speckles like distant stars in cosmic dust. A gentle laugh escapes you. Telomeres, not just telephone poles, you murmur to yourself. Recalling Section 2's embolic humor about phlegm. Footsteps approach and you bump into a young technician, carrying a rack of DNA sequencing gels. She smiles apologetically, apologizing for the slow run. The lab bought surplus equipment from a defunct silicon badge company. You empathize. Every suppressed cure relied on borrowed tools and budget scrounging. You watch electric currents snake through agar until colored bands appear, mapping viral genome fragments like barcode stripes as you retrace your path through the red-lit corridor. The lab's rhythmic hum feels like a lullaby of potential yet unrealized. You pass a scrap of paper affixed to a door. 1981 Gene Therapy Accord Review meeting postponed. You imagine a panel of stern-faced officials trading briefcases instead of bench pipes, quietly shelving bold trials until public sentiment and corporate licenses aligned. Exiting into the night air. You inhale city smog, tinged with the promise of neon-clad labs humming beneath bridge underpasses. You feel the weight of frozen viral vectors in your pockets, relics of ambition and regulation. You wonder which suppressed trial might have cured hemophilia a decade earlier, or spared a child from SCID's bubble, but you also sense that every setback sowed the seeds for more. Rigorous safeguards and the eventual triumph of ADA gene therapy. In 1990, your eyelids flutter as you step onto the sidewalk. the lab lights fading behind you like dying constellations. You almost hear a final whisper from those early pioneers. Our cure awaits the right code. And with that hope tucked into your coat, you head home, cradled by city lights and the soft hum of tomorrow's gene-editing dreams. You step out of the gene therapy wing into a corridor that hums, not with Bunsen burners, but with the low roar of server fans. The air smells of recycled coffee and warm plastic, slick with ozone from blinking LEDs. You follow the glow of glass-paneled doors labeled AI Research Lab, recalling the ghostly hum of retroviral vectors in Section 14 and the swirl of Paracelsus's mercury steam in Section 5. Each whispering that innovation rides a fine line between promise and peril. Inside, rows of servers blink in unison, their green and blue diodes pulsing like a chorus of synthetic fireflies. A digital ticker displays dataset 3.2 PB pending queries 1,432, reminding you that tomorrow's cures depend not on herbal manuscripts bound by parchment, but on petabytes of health records. Early mainstream fact. In 2016, researchers used an AI algorithm to identify halicin, a new antibiotic effective against drug-resistant bacteria milestone that showcased AI's potential in drug discovery. You trace your fingertip along a smooth touchscreen lectern and feel a satisfying cone click as an interactive map floods the wall. It charts global clinical trials, color-coded by corporate sponsor. You squint at a cluster of red dots in the neuroenhancement lines, AI-driven companies licensing proprietary nootropic algorithms. A fringe tidbit flickers in your mind. Biohacker forums once whispered about a generative adversarial network trained on zebrafish genomics to conjure a rumored sleep-free elixir, offering users the chance to work in perpetual twilight. It sounds ludicrous, but desperate minds have chased stranger cures. Scholars still argue whether these algorithmic-generated leads yield real molecules or simply reflect dataset drift. A gloved technician swipes an RFID badge and unlocks a cabinet labeled proprietary models. Inside lies a sleek black box stamped Big Pharma Pipeline V 4.7. You inhale the faint fragrance of cool metal and electronics, vaguely reminiscent of lab-grade acetone. You recall the crocodile dung sunscreen from Section 1, the radium water from Section 8, and chuckle at how each era bottles its own bizarre promise. Now it's data scribbles in silicon, and your pulse flutters at the thought of corporate encryption, keys guarding tomorrow's medicine. You watch a holographic simulation as it replays a neural network. It's narrowing 10 million molecular scaffolds to a single compound with potential antiviral activity. You almost feel dizzy at the speed screens refreshing faster than your pulse. Yet beneath that technical ballet, a conflict simmers. Companies demand exclusive rights to any AI proposed molecule, filing immediate patent claims before chemists even see the bench. Historians still argue whether this dynamic accelerates treatment timelines or enshrines corporate chokeholds on public health. You lean in to light a soy wax candle left on a side table, its faint sandalwood scent layered over server heat, like offering incense to a digital idol. A slender jar nearby holds a clear gel infused with graphene nanoparticles, placeholder for a rumored smart bandage that delivers insulin on demand. It promises personal data feedback loops, but you wonder if that data will feed only corporate analytics engines. You taste mint from a breath strip and imagine devices granting approval only if your biometric code matches consumer credentials. Trading cures for data. You walk past a bay of sleek glass terminals where clinicians conduct virtual diagnostic sessions. A voice assistant whispers recommendations for juvenile arthritis. It's promising GN-targeted monoclonal antibodies before lunch. Yet you notice disclaimers fading beneath floodlights. Datasets lack representation from rural clinics, indigenous communities, and you remember the codskin sled dogs from Section 9. The Inuit lab notebooks from Section 9. The suppressed cannabis research in Section 12. Many digital therapies remain blind to those data voids, reinforcing health disparities. Scholars still argue whether algorithmic stewardship enhances equity or entrenches. Digital colonialism. You brush against a whiteboard scribbled with Project SmartPatch V2, a wearable, transdermal sensor delivering microdoses of peptide. Therapies based on heart rate variability and mood logs. It clicks data to a corporate cloud, syncing with pharmacy refill algorithms that reorder before you realize you need rest. The tick of its haptic feedback is a lullaby of self-care, or a siren of surveillance, depending on whose interests it serves. A discarded note next to it reads, "Beta testers needed. 1,000 signed consent by midnight." Another echo of rushed trials suppressed under privacy PRETEXTs as you near a window overlooking a rooftop garden. It's the same green space where Section 12's cannabis archive sits below. You notice a droning black quadcopter scanning telemetry. Drones hover above clinical trial sites, scooping environmental data to calibrate AI models. You wonder if they'll ever herald the retrieval of lost cures or simply map the footprints of data furrows. You step through the glass door into a chilled hallway, the faint vibration of cooling fans underfoot, and exhale. The digital frontier pulses with potential, but also cast trembles under the weight of code and contract. You feel the gentle weight of history's suppressed cures settling around you like a warm blanket laid across tired shoulders. Each memory of crocodile dung, sunscreen, and radium baths, plant tonics, and genetic dreams becomes a soft whisper, beckoning you to trust that knowledge finds its way back into light, even when it wanders through shadowed corridors first. In the gentle rhythm of your breath, the stories of ancient apothecaries, daring alchemists, pioneering surgeons, and tireless researchers weave together, reminding you that curiosity never sleeps and compassion endures. Let each suppressed remedy live as a quiet promise that tomorrow's breakthroughs will build upon every fragment of forgotten wisdom. Feel your eyelids grow heavy as the world slows outside, and rest assured that every hidden scroll, every lost laboratory notebook, and every silent genome still awaits rediscovery. Know that the human impulse to heal transcends barriers of power, fear, or profit, and that every whisper of a cure, once buried, persists in the collective heartbeat of science and story. As you drift towards sleep, let the hum of server fans fade into gentle wind through ancient olive groves. Let the glow of LED screens dissolve into candlelight in hidden chambers. And let the memory of every suppressed innovation cradle you in tranquility. Soon you will wake to a new dawn where hope is rekindled, insight awaits, and the next suppressed cure may emerge from the dimmest shelves to transform our world. May your mind rest easy, cradled by the promise of tomorrow's healing light. Restorative peace surrounds you. End of script. Sweet dreams.